Welcome, wanderer. You call upon the Obsidian Grimoire once more. Its pages are heavy with anguish and terror. I am the keeper, cursed to guard its words and speak what time would see forgotten, to guide you into the darkness where memory and myth entwine. Come closer and hear a tale that longs to be remembered. A mausoleum rose like a pale lantern upon the hill, its door heavy, its silence heavier still. Few dared the narrow path that wound through forest and field to reach it. The dead there were left to their sleep. Yet one man went daily, for within that tomb lay his wife. Their marriage had spanned near 20 years. It was not marked by grandeur, but by gentleness. Evenings by the hearth, the scent of bread cooling on the table, her laughter as she wove at the loom while he plucked at his lute. Neighbors said their love was steady as the seasons, an affection that deepened with every passing year. But one winter, fever struck her down. He tended her without rest, feeding her broth, pressing cool cloths to her brow, whispering lullabies in place of prayer. For a time she smiled faintly, trying to ease his sorrow, but the illness gnawed away until at last her hand fell limp in his. She died with his name upon her lips. He laid her to rest in the hilltop tomb. From that day forward his life was bound to it. Each morning he carried meals, setting bread and fruit upon the cold steps as if she might share them. At dusk he played his lute before the stone, weaving sorrow into song. At night, he often threw himself upon the floor to sleep, cheek against marble, as though to warm the dead with his breath. It was on one of those nights, half dreaming, that he first heard her voice. Move on. His eyes flew open, heart hammering, for it was hers beyond all doubt, yet the coffin lay still. The next night it returned, clearer. You must leave. You must live. Do not linger. At first he wept, swearing he would try. For weeks, he forced himself back into the village. He tended the fields, joined his neighbors at their tables, even played his lute at the tavern. But every meal was ash, every laugh a strain. The bed at home yawned too wide. The hearth's warmth seemed an insult. Inevitably, the road to the mausoleum called him back. Each night the voice urged him away. Each night he answered it, until answer became argument. Go, I cannot. Do not return, I will never leave you. Let go. Never. Do you hear me? Never. The choral stretched on for weeks, the man's voice cracking with tears and rage, until it sounded less like a plea and more like a breaking thing. From the village, the path through the trees grew quieter, and the hill accepted his pilgrimages as if they were only part of the weather. At last, beneath a thin and watchful moon, he pried the coffin lid wide and looked down at the woman he had loved. A breath of sour, sweet air rose, heavy with the smell of decay. He gagged, but did not look away. She lay sunken, wrapped in the hush of death, and yet to him she was unchanged. Still the woman who hummed while she wove, still the bride whose fingers had fit his. He took from his satchel a small thing he had kept hidden, a tiny springed catch, plain and ordinary in itself, now heavy with intent. He pressed the catch into place along the lid's seam, and then, without pausing, climbed in and folded himself about her, his fingers finding the brittle curve of her hand as if to keep it warm. For a breath he waited, listening for some protest from the night. A branch, a fox, anything, and heard only the hollow wind. Then he drew the lid down. It did not merely close, it fell like a curtain on a play already ended, swallowing the last thread of moonlight. The seam met with the faint scrape of wood on wood, and the air itself seemed to recoil. When the small catch took, it gave a single terrible click. Not an ordinary sound, but a verdict. A bell struck inside a tomb. The noise rolled up the hill and died. The world outside was gone in the span of that single note. Darkness poured in, thick as oil, swallowing his laugh that turned into a sob. The close air pressed around him, small and warm and final. He felt the last daylight slide from his face and whispered his vow into the dark, where only the corpse and the metal answer could receive it. He pressed his cheek to her shoulder as he had 100 nights before, though now her shoulder was cold as cut stone. He held her brittle hand, and for a moment the two of them were the same as they had been in some other life, close, inevitable. The small catch sat at the lid seam, mute and irreversible. He breathed, "If you will not let me stay in life, and in death you shall have no choice but my company." He curled where there was room, the coffin pressed against his sides. Darkness devoured him. Inside, the air was hot and stale and close. He could feel its weight pressing at his skin, hear his pulse as if it were another small drum in the dark. He turned his head toward the tiny lump of metal and listened. "I am here, love," he murmured. Silence answered, stone and cloth and rot keeping her counsel. "I've come to stay." Hours passed, or minutes. Time wore no pattern in that narrow dark. He began to speak more to fill the air. At first, as in life, soft stories and half melodies to make the darkness less absolute. Then his voice grew. Confessions, reproaches, laughter brittle as glass. He answered arguments no one made, argued with a bride who would not answer, begged her for pardon, and promised again the vows he had once spoken at the altar. Breath by breath, his words thinned into a single small sound, the slow rustle of a man trying to keep despair at bay. Sometimes he laughed, startling himself. Sometimes he wept, until the sound was as wet as the coffined cloth. The coffin creaked inside with his heat and weight. He had bound himself to keep the vow. In the dark, with only the corpse and the iron for company, the promise consumed him. The world beyond the lid, trees, village, sun, slipped into distance until it was as if it had never been. Only the low warmth for his breath and the catch's mute decision remained, holding him to the last thing he had loved. The clasp alone knew what he had chosen, and the hills swallowed his absence whole. The tale is told, and the burden returns to me. The grimoire closes, yet sorrow clings to those who listen. Beware thy path, lest the dark take you. Until we meet again at the turning of another page.